The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Welcome. I'm Anita Scott, and I'd like to introduce you to today's presentation, New Tools and Strategies to Reduce Software Risk and Successfully Defend Software Audits. Your presenters are Robert J. Scott, Managing Partner of Scott & Scott LLP, who's counsel to some of the world's largest corporations on software licensing, transactions, and disputes. Derek Hansen is the U.S. Business Development Manager at License Dashboard, a leading global SAM solution specialist. He has over 6 years' experience delivering cost savings and risk mitigation to organizations worldwide, from large corporate enterprises to smaller, fast-growing businesses. We'll answer questions as time permits. Please use the Q&A box on the screen on the right. The presentation is being recorded, and we'll send you a replay in a few days. One final note, please remain on the webinar to the end for an important announcement. Thank you, and here is Robert.
Thank you, Anita, and thank everybody for joining this presentation. I'm very excited to have an opportunity to present with License Dashboard. I've been working in software licensing and software asset management for a decade now, and have generally become aware of all of the products that are out there, and as many of you know, have developed with other members of the Scott & Scott team our own software application. And I could say unequivocally that License Dashboard is the coolest software asset management software I've ever seen. And so we're very delighted to have created a business partnership with License Dashboard, and grateful for Derek for joining. I'm going to start the presentation by talking about some of the legal issues that we encounter in our practice regarding software audit matters, and some tips and tricks that I've learned along the way that will help you mitigate risk. And then I'm going to introduce Derek, and he's going to do a short introduction about License Dashboard, and then the cool part will start, and he'll jump right into a live demonstration of their product. And then when he's finished, we'll have some time for Q&A, and as Anita said, we've got a special offer that we're going to make at the end of the presentation for the attendees. So again, thank you very much for joining. I think the biggest thing that people, our clients, are surprised by when they get into a software audit matter is how the chips are stacked against them from a legal perspective at the outset. And what I'm talking about is that the audit rights provisions and audit resolution provisions in typical software license agreements are very one-sided, written by the lawyers that represent the vendors, and not very evenly balanced to address the concerns of the end users. Frequently they will include some very generic restriction on reasonable interference with business operations, but I personally have never been involved in an audit that didn't unreasonably interfere with business operations. So what's reasonable, obviously, is subject to interpretation, and usually could be misinterpreted, or definitely could be a disagreement as to what is reasonable under the circumstances. In addition, most of the time there's no specific geographic or other product SKU-based scope limitations on audits. So we frequently see, audits that say we want to audit you globally, all products, all entities, all affiliates, all over the world, all agreements, which sometimes I think boiling the ocean could be easier than responding to those unlimited scope audit requests. There's also very few protections about information disclosure, confidentiality, or the use of evidence that's shared in connection with a software audit in the event that a case is not settled out of court and ultimately there is litigation, which I would tell you from my own experience does happen from time to time. While most audit matters are settled out of court, from time to time we do wind up in federal copyright litigation involving publishers and courts around the country, and it's important to understand the impact of the information that gets shared in connection with audits and the fact that the onus is on the end user to make sure that agreements are entered into, because the license agreements themselves generally have few or no protections on that point. The other area where our clients frequently get shocked is the effect of audit findings. And what I mean by that is if there's a gap that's determined between the entitlements and the deployments, what financial consequences result under the terms of the license agreement. And in many instances, the biggest issue is if you've got inadvertently deployed software that hasn't been used. In many cases, the publishers will take the position that you have to buy that even though no economic value has been conferred to the end user. So you wind up buying licenses that you don't need and haven't used. In addition, claims for back maintenance for unlicensed deployments in some cases could be a percentage of the MSRP. In other cases could be based on a backwards extrapolation that is contractually permitted, and even worse, could have a multiplier effect where you wind up paying 115% looking back to, in some instances, the inception of the agreement. And in certain types of audit matters, the backward-looking maintenance or the backward-looking extrapolation becomes the most significant financial aspect of the claim. We also see in some instances provisions that say we're going to bring in a third-party auditor who allegedly is going to be acting independently, but that third-party auditor's fees can be transferred to the end user in the event that the alleged licensing gap exceeds a certain percentage. Most agreements that I see, the threshold is 5%. So that's another aspect of what we're seeing in terms of burdensome terms. So what we try to do when we get involved in an audit matter at the outset is to try to get what we refer to as an interim agreement or a pre-audit agreement that really goes into greater detail, amplifying the terms that were contained in the license agreement, specifying what products and machines are going to be included versus excluded, trying to exclude, for example, entities that may not be relevant with our large global clients. We often are looking at limiting to the geographic scope of excluding remote countries or countries that are more difficult to manage and focusing on USA or just North America for scope. We also, in every case, require the auditors and the vendors to sign an agreement. I refer to it as a 408 agreement. 408 is a federal rule of evidence that deals with the exchange of settlement communications, and it provides a protection against use of that information that's disclosed in connection with a settlement agreement. So we use these confidentiality agreements that we enter into before any audit information is shared to solidify the protections of the audit materials and to ensure that neither the auditors or the vendors will use or disclose that information in the event that an out-of-court resolution is not possible. And I think that's the most important aspects of the pre-audit agreement. I find so often that clients will move forward with audits quickly, perhaps not involve their internal or external legal counsel, wind up disclosing a great deal of information in good faith, thinking that the vendor or the auditor will in kind be acting in good faith, only to be astonished by the trumped-up claims that result, and therefore wind up wishing that they had handled the matter more cautiously than what they did. So we have developed a process. The auditing entities are quite familiar with the requirements, and we find that it's a matter of routine, but we always like to hammer out as many of the details about how the audit is going to go down up front and before things get started as possible. I once had a CFO ask me in the context of helping his company get his arms around his software licensing, Rob, how hard is it to count? You know, it's just 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. You just count it up. And what I had to explain to him that is in the software licensing world, data collection challenges are rampant and widespread, and it's not so easy to count. And those of you that are on the line that work in IT or in software asset management, which we have many today, are well aware of some of these complications. And I would say the biggest one that we get called on to help clients work out is what I call document soup. Document soup arises when a client has a long-term relationship with a publisher, may have a master agreement dating back, decades from today, and then a number of ordering documents or supplemental license agreements that refer back to the original agreement, that modify the original agreements in some ways but not all. And so what we wind up with is the effort of decoding what the real and current contractual relationship is between the parties. And so this document soup really makes it complicated to track what the licenses are, what the entitlements are, what the licensing models are, and how one license agreement signed 10 years ago relates to the agreement that was signed last year. And there's no real secret to this process. It's really about lining up all the documents, making sure that you have everything you need, identifying the missing documents, and then having an attorney that's experienced with these matters go through in detail and map the contractual relationships over time. We also find that we have many clients that have a number of different tools, but in many instances the tools that they have are inadequate. The tools suffer from a number of challenges, one of which is they're not always easy to deploy in complex IT environments across global infrastructure. They generally don't work well in the non-Windows world, and we have clients that running all kinds of flavors of Linux, Unix, and non-Windows environments. And so the tools are difficult at best. I would say they're a necessary part of the solution, but certainly not a sufficient part. And then you have the interpretive problem of once the tools are deployed and the data starts coming in, it's like an avalanche of information. And one of the things that Derek will talk about is how a license dashboard helps deal with normalizing and filtering that data down so the interpretive work that goes into analyzing discovery data becomes more manageable. In addition, we generally have this struggle between needing information from employees within an organization, but also the concern about keeping the audit process to disclosure of it to as few people as possible. So we generally build a team of a few important stakeholders, and unfortunately they get the burden of carrying the load because we're loath to bring too many people in to the project for legal and confidentiality reasons. So that becomes a challenge. In addition, the use case scenarios that the software is deployed in, whether it's the data center infrastructure or how users are accessing or the relationship of the users to the company deploying the software. All of these characteristics, we refer to them as use case scenarios. All of that information becomes critically important to determining the licenses and interpreting what entitlements exist to each use case. And so we generally will staff each of our projects with both lawyers and technology professionals so that we're able to have a deep understanding of not only the legal aspects that are dictated by the licensing agreements, but also the ability to take a deep technical dive into complex infrastructure issues, use case scenarios, and as many of you guys know, the devil's in the details on these use cases, and some simple nuances at a very technical level could be the difference between millions of dollars in controversy. I would say the number one reason that clients come to our firm is they don't have the ability internally to generate an exposure analysis in connection with an existing or threatened or potential software audit matter. And so what they find themselves in a situation is with the inability to do meaningful risk assessment, the inability to properly respond to what they know is a trumped up and ill-supported financial demand from a publisher, because they don't have the ability to generate their own financial exposure analysis based on the data, the licensing rules, and their entitlements. And that's the number one thing that we do. Early on in my career, I started getting hired onto cases as the second lawyer on the case. And all of those cases had one thing in common, that the lawyer involved before me, the one namely that was fired, made the mistake of not giving the client visibility into the financial aspects of their factual situation. So they would tell the client, well, the vendor wants us to do an audit and tell them what we have installed, and they want us to send us their documents. And so the client would gather that information. There would be no discussion or risk assessment associated with it. That information would be shared in many cases without a pre-audit agreement or a 408 type agreement. Next thing you know, the client gets punched in the face with a huge demand, and when the lawyer is asked, how did this happen, why did this happen, that they don't have an adequate answer. And so we've just learned from that experience that the number one thing that our clients rely on us for is no surprises, and to give them a meaningful and independent assessment of the financial exposure they have with a particular issue, or how to value a dispute for purposes of settlement negotiations, or for purposes of financial reporting. For many of our clients are publicly traded companies with very significant financial disclosure obligations, and they rely on us to assist them with discharging those responsibilities. And without the ability to conduct meaningful exposure analysis, it's very difficult for them to do that. We also, as I said earlier, find that the use cases and the infrastructure details in many instances have a huge impact on the dispute. I've been involved with cases where the use case is the only question. We're involved with the data center. There's no question that licenses have been purchased for the servers in question. The only issue is whether those licenses that were purchased were adequate to cover that use case. So we frequently will find, believe it or not, a publisher will take an end user's money, they'll happily give them the licenses and fully reserve the right to come around later and say, we sold you the wrong licenses. That's not our problem. That's your problem. And we're not saying you can't use these licenses that we sold you. What we are saying is they require a different license type because the use cases that you have are not appropriate for how you're using the software. So it's very critical to integrate your infrastructure planning, your infrastructure management from an IT perspective, and link that with your procurement and with your software asset management with appropriate tie-ins to legal, both in-house and outside as necessary, so that you can avoid falling into these types of traps. So in many instances, we are able, as I mentioned, to settle cases out of court and wind up as the client advocate or quarterback in negotiations to resolve an audit dispute. And I would say if you don't take anything away from this presentation today, which I'm sure you will be very impressed with what Derek has to tell you about License Dashboard, I want you to focus on this last bullet about getting a release. My attitude on software audit resolutions is there's no such thing as a resolution without a release, and clients should not write checks without releases, and that auditors and vendors are just going to have to get comfortable with the new reality that says the time for you to voice your concerns regarding our compliance situation is at or before the time you take our money, not after. And so I'll leave you with that. And if there's no release, then you really need to keep fighting to make sure that anytime you have an audit and you're reaching an audit resolution, that all claims are released at the end of that process. Now for the fun part. I'd like to introduce Derek Hansen with License Dashboard. As I mentioned, Scott & Scott has developed a business partnership with License Dashboard around this very impressive technology. And I think you'll be very impressed with what Derek has to say. Derek?
Great, Rob. Well, I appreciate the introduction. And first of all, I just want to say to all of our attendees, thanks again for taking time out of your busy schedule to join both Rob and I. One of the things that I would like to say, first of all, is that I started my software asset management career working behind the scenes for a software publisher doing audits. They were soft audits, but I do want to say that all of the information that Rob has shared is very rich information as far as how you can be proactive in the audit process. And when you look at the overall industry trend, the audit techniques by publishers are definitely increasing and not going away. So I just want to say as much as far as the information that Rob shared today. Real quick, what I want to do today is just give you a quick overview as far as what License Dashboard feels is the challenges within today's software asset management market. I want to give you an overview of the technology that we've created that really makes that process much easier or eviscerates those challenges that you are probably facing. And then lastly, from there, just open up the application itself, walk you through some of the reporting functionality, as well as what it's like to actually manage software requests from the end user. Just want to make sure that I have control. I'm not quite sure if I can move my slide deck right now at the moment, though. Second. Yeah, there we go. Okay, apologies for that. So real quick, License Dashboard has been around since 2004. It was born out of the need to do license baselines for organizations We have been sanctioned by the likes of Microsoft, VMware, Adobe. We are working with other publishers to get official accreditation as far as our organization, both from a tool perspective as well as from a services perspective. So when it comes to software asset management, we have a lot of different feedback that we typically get from an organization as far as what they feel that their understanding of software asset management is. And so what we've decided to do this past fall is really create a framework which really helps identify either where you're at within the software asset management process and or what the end journey or what the most viable outcome can be with solid software asset management practices and concepts. Now the first part of this is probably the most obvious, which is recognize. That basically is just not only understanding everything that you have deployed from a software usage perspective, but it's also looking at the other side of the equation and your license entitlements. License entitlement is very important because it does dictate some of the software usage terms that you're discovering within your environment. So from a high level, what you're trying to do is at least just understand both data sets and just get some kind of basic understanding around, what are the number of desktops that I have deployed or that are active within my environment? What does my server complexity look like? And then, of course, how do I marry that to my license entitlements and just come up with a basic, ELP or effective license position for where I am, and also just looking at what, software publishers based on spend are important or should be part of that process internally. The second part of the equation is really, optimizing your license entitlements. And so at the beginning of this, what you're doing is you're just trying to make sense of where you're at. And the second part of this is going back and, if you have, let's say, metering turned on for an inventory platform, what you can do is you can understand maybe how often a certain product is being utilized and for how often, which gives you much more data around, with a contract with a publisher, if that product should be supported, if it's part of a larger suite, or if it needs to be licensed by a standalone component. Bring your own device is also another important thing to think about as you're setting up new contract terms with your publishers. All of this is just kind of going through with more of a forensic approach and really just trying to right size that license spend that you've already done in the first part of the ROC framework. The third part of the equation is control. And so what you've done to the first two part of this process is not only understand where you're at, but also really optimize what that looks like. The third part is really a game changer. It's being proactive. And when you think about the overall software life cycle, this is the part that ties into procurement, which really closes that gap. And so what you're doing is you're basically setting up policies and procedures for the end user where they can only request and have certain software approved that you've set up. And so what that means is that end user can't install anything that is outside of what you've already set in place for that end user. Now in the middle of this diagram, it really does illustrate what the two of the largest risks are as far as software asset management entails, compliance and cost. You can also see this triangle in some ways as what License Dashboard's Chief Product License Manager is intended to do. And so when we have organizations that either want to start on their journey or if they're at least familiar with getting started on that journey, they can do a few different things. They can either outsource this work to us, and we do have what we call our auditors or consultants who are power users or stewards of this technology who can do this work for an organization. Or what we can do is we can work collaboratively because we have built specific work streams within each of this framework that does have the end goal that we're calling out in each particular framework. Or what we can also do is provide the technology and this framework with specific guidebooks that we have created to ensure that if an organization feels that they can do this independently, that as they're using our technology, that they can do so in a very effective fashion. So real quick, what I want to do is just walk through what the technology looks like from an actual high level. You can see in the middle here that we have the our flagship product that I've already referenced called License Manager. Now when you flip over to the left-hand side of the diagram, as Rob alluded to earlier, you do have a lot of inventory platforms that most organizations are leveraging in some capacity. Now they range from Microsoft's SCCM, Dell's Case, Altiris. We have our own inventory product as well as like Symantec, et cetera, et cetera. Now these platforms, while sometimes being difficult to deploy, they're great at doing several different things, namely pushing out new software, great at patch management, but where they do tend to struggle is in normalizing that software usage data. And so what License Dashboard has done is created connectors which complement the investment that an organization has made in these platforms. Now the nice thing about that is that we have a connector to 45 different standard platforms within the market, but we also normalize that through the dictionaries that we've created. So we have dictionaries that spell out, like versus on the executable side, what that specific software title and version actually is. Without that, it still is a very granular, gritty process, and it's very time-consuming. And at the end of the day, most organizations still have difficulty at least understanding what that product actually is. Now, you can set up multiple feeds from these platforms, and you can still bring all of that into the application itself through our connectors that we've created. We do cover the non-Wintel platforms, which I've illustrated in the middle part of the slide, like SAP, IBM, and Oracle. And then we also have connectors for the virtualized aspect of platforms, whether that's VMware or Microsoft's Hyper-V environment. And it really covers everything as far as how we're able to pick up what software is being deployed in your environment. When you flip over to the right-hand side, we also have a technique that normalizes that license evidence on your behalf. Now there are a couple of software publishers that do provide consumption reports. Whether you utilize a consumption report by a publisher, you manually add licenses, or if you also use an XML template that we also provide. What's nice about our technology is how we actually normalize that data. So we analyze the SKU number, the product, the license metric, the model, the agreement date, if there's potentially software assurance. And we really go through that and analyze, what that means from a license entitlement perspective. Oftentimes, first of all, when you think about publishers and as they continue to change the complexity for how that they're licensing a certain product, it's difficult to stay on top of that without being a full-time auditor yourself. Our normalization techniques give you the ability to call out potential upgrade, downgrade rights, which really helps analyze that and also be able to confidently understand what that complete license entitlement is. Now once that information comes into the application, what you have then is the ability to marry these two data sets together. Independently, they are complex data sets. We normalize both sets. And as a byproduct of that, what we're able to do is then push this out into the cloud where you're going to have the ability to manage all of this from one single pane of glass. Now from here, what I'd like to do is just give you a quick overview of what the technology itself looks like. first of all, are you guys able to see, let me see if I can share my desktop here. Okay. Okay. Hopefully everybody can see my screen now. So what we have here is, as far as that single pane of glass, is being able to show all of the relevant information that you would be concerned, whether you're a CIO, the SAM program manager, or the IT administrator. We can see our overall number of license entitlements, the number of devices that we're managing. We can look at the devices within our enterprise agreement, for example. And then we can even look at this from a little bit more detailed level. My apologies here. Just log back in. I appreciate your patience. Okay, fair enough. So from an executive standpoint, what you can now see once you bring these two data sets together is where you're at from a license availability, what your installations look like for a particular publisher. You can see you've got an overall number of installations, an unlicensed number of installations, as well as what your compliance costs would potentially be once you've put in a financial cost to all of your products. Now, it is easy to get very granular. So if you want to drill into a particular product for a publisher, you can now look at your entire footprint. When you also bring in your agreements, you can see that through the maintenance dashboard that we've called out. So you can now see what agreements that you need to be concerned with throughout the calendar year. You can set up specific business units as well. So if you want to manage them by a call center, by geographic location, gives you the ability to really customize these different data sets per your preference. What I'd like to do is just now go into the ability when I talk about the control aspect of software asset management, what that means as far as being proactive. And so we have a new piece of technology called SAM Director, which does sit on License Manager. The two do tie in together. What's nice about that, though, is that you can set up products and you can set up users that have the ability to manage or request software. So you can see that this user would come in here and they have a list of predefined software that you have already set up. You can, what we recommend to do is that you set in an actual cost, because that gives that end user the line of sight to figure out, well, I want to potentially buy Adobe Creative Suite in this instance, but I am noticing that it is over $1,200. Naturally, most end users are going to probably question themselves that do I really need to order this particular piece of software? At the end of the day, at least we find that helps illustrate things further. Another thing that we've also done here is that we've, within our dictionaries, created links for each particular product. So if you want to view this, the end user can come in here and actually see what this product is and what its intended use is. This also helps convey what the product that they're ordering is intended to do. Move this back over here. You can then have specific line managers that then can come in that can manage these software requests. They can click into these details. They can see the requested date, the actual reason for the request. If it's for a specific job, it does detail out the user, who it's supposed to be approved by, the overall number of products, the devices that this would be associated to, the number of installations, and also the history as far as how often that this product is being requested. This then goes into the manage a license aspect. So you can go in here to review the report as far as understanding, okay, we have this particular business unit, this product. We do have 20 available in this instance. So this makes sure that, again, you're not overspending on the licenses position that you've already created and optimized in the first part of that ROC framework that I had walked you through earlier. Just continue to go through the life cycle here, or the purchasing cycle. You can now see that you've got 8 items that need to be processed, and you can click into this, and this is how you're able to put in a purchase order number, for example, the order ID. You can then confirm that purchase order. You can send an email then to the land manager, who then needs to take that purchase and manage that deployment. What we'd like to do from this point now is just open it back up to questions for both Rob and I, and we will address questions as you guys see fit.
Thank you very much, Derek. I appreciate you taking the time to show us the license dashboard. I love that one single pane view into the license situation, and the way you do your graphs, your pie charts and your graphs, I think is second to none in the industry. If you have a question for either Derek or me, would you please use the Q&A bar at the side. The first question we have: why would a licensor agree to a 408 agreement if they have a contractual right to perform the audit? That's a good question. The 408 agreement deals with use and disclosure of the information that the client is sharing. And I would tell you that I have never had an issue conceptually with a vendor or an auditor agreeing to a 408 type agreement. Now, we can quibble over the details, but it's generally accepted practice within the industry that these types of agreements will be signed. And the reason that they do it is that the customers have a legitimate privacy, security, and confidentiality concern regarding the audit, and they don't want to be in a situation where if they're sharing information in good faith in connection with the audit, that the publisher would then use it against them in the event that the case is not settled out of court. So that's an excellent question. The next question is, does License Dashboard have multi-tenancy capability for IT consultants or managed service providers who track licensing for multiple companies? And I'll let Derek tackle that one.
Rob, would you mind repeating the question again real quick?
Sure, Derek. Does License Dashboard have multi-tenancy capability for IT consultants or managed service providers who can track licensing for multiple companies as a consultant or managed service provider?
Yes, we do. Yep. So we have a variety of frameworks as far as our partners and consultants are concerned. We do have 37 different partners in some capacity. One of those instances would be the ability to have an ASP model, which would be a multi-tenant version. Or what you could also do is set up multiple business units for different organizations per a agreement or framework that we would have set up with you in a predetermined way, if that makes sense.
That does make sense. Thanks, Derek. Next question. How does the License Dashboard work in conjunction with software vendor tools like IBM ILMT? And for those of you who don't know what IBM ILMT is, it's IBM's proprietary licensing tool that if you're using virtualization and subcapacity licensing in connection with your IBM deployments, the subcapacity license agreement requires that you deploy this particular tool or one or two other tools by IBM, and to keep significant reports regarding that. So with that background for the benefit of the other participants, Derek, how does License Dashboard work in conjunction with software vendor tools? You mentioned SCCM and other vendor tools, but can you speak to this question specifically with regard to IBM and ILMT?
Yeah, with ILMT, we're actually able to take an output out of ILMT, and we're able to actually insert that usage into the data cleanse aspect, which does cover, what software usage you're being deployed. On the licensing side, or the flip side of that, we have all of the licensing terms and constrictions that IBM has set up, and that is part of one of our 12,000 publishers that we do incorporate through our dictionaries from a license normalization standpoint. So we can do that with ILMT in particular. Great question.
All right, next question. This one is for you, Derek. What is the typical implementation time from the time that someone acquires the licenses for License Dashboard to the time that they go live?
That's a great question. Well, there's a couple aspects to that. First of all, as far as the application itself, all you need is a SQL database to stand the application up on. It takes about 30 minutes to actually get the application up and running. Now, the more nuanced dynamic to this is really in regards to whatever type of process that you're utilizing as far as your software usage is concerned. As long as you have a process already set up, our connectors are able to extract that information in a very quick way. So for an example, we have a multinational oil company, 10,000 users. They leverage that against their SCCM with our connector. We pull all of the files that we need out of there within about 4 minutes time. So long story short, half an hour to stand the application up, a few minutes to actually bring in your software usage files, and then depending upon your license evidence, it should only take a little bit longer to fill that in. But that's where things get a little bit more subtle, if that makes sense as well.
The next question, this one's also for you, Derek. Can you explain or demonstrate how the License Dashboard deals with virtualization details involving virtual machines and how it works in conjunction with the virtualization management technologies such as VMware or Hyper-V?
I'd be happy to if you're willing to make me presenter again so I can share my desktop.
We'll get that going here in 1 second for you, Derek.
Yep, no worries. Don't mean to be so demanding today, Rob, by the way. Okay, so can you see my screen okay?
Looks good, Derek.
Okay, great. So when I go into virtualization, first one of the things I want to illustrate, I never did this because I wanted to show you what it looks like for the user to manage requests through our SAM Director or NetApp store. But with VMware or Hyper-V in particular, what you could show is the cluster itself, the physical boxes, and all of the virtual boxes that are running within this cluster. Now, if you do have vMotion turned on, what we're also able to do is share some scenarios as far as what that potential licensing implication looks like as well. Now, if you go into our data cleanse workspace and we want to look at virtualization in particular, what we're able to do is help you at least understand the guest software usage that you're running within your virtualized environment. So let's say we want to look at server standard 2003 right here. What you're able to do is potentially, let's just say, select all of these servers. You can map with new and change it to data center, which releases that normal licensing requirements and then now has you ask for licensing versus the data center, which obviously changes the licensing implications quite substantially. So that just from a high level is our approach to virtualization. There is a little bit of manual manipulation, but it's so straightforward. The other thing, while I'm shamelessly talking here, is that what you can do is when you're doing one audit run to the next is apply previous edits, which ensures that anything that you've changed as far as the licensing metric or model for virtualization is remembered. So you're not having to start that work stream from scratch from one audit run to the next, therefore reducing a lot of the time and resource on your end as well.
Derek, why don't we stay here for this next question, which is, can you walk us through the other features and functionality of the data cleanse portion of the tool?
Okay, fair enough. So a couple things here. First of all, just to walk you through, if we want to import data from our files, from let's just say SCCM, et cetera, what you're able to do is open this up. You can then apply those previous edits like I had just alluded to. You can add missing data centers. You can include that virtualization mapping. All of that information comes within here, right? If you need to potentially change this information to, let's say, MSDN, et cetera, this is where you have the ability to change the environment as well. You also can add four specific fields that we've customized per your preference as well. You can see the hardware information. What you then are able to do, let's just say for some of the more trickier publishers like Adobe, is apply suites and rules. And so in this instance, what we're showing is if we're seeing this MSI with this executable, we know that it's not only Adobe Acrobat Standard 5.0, but actually Standard Professional MSI 5.0. You continue to walk through this fields, and then once you get through this, then what you're able to do is then commit that to software usage. And so if you selected certain publishers to be part of your managed software, it then becomes within your managed software. So data cleanse is a bit of a quarantine field that you do have to walk through. Once you get through that process, you are now into the managed software or the software usage of this workspace. Hopefully that was easy enough to follow.
Derek, you went over a part of the tool that we have found to be very helpful when helping clients with implementation, and that's the suites and rules functionality. Can you do a little bit deeper dive on that, please?
Yeah, definitely. So suites and rules are very difficult to, certain products are very difficult to figure out what actual product that you're utilizing. And so when I alluded to earlier about how you're using a inventory platform that's giving you information with this executable, sometimes it's just not enough information without having to go to that particular machine and understand what the version is. So what we're doing with the MSI data is calling out if we're seeing, this and this from the executable, and this matches with the MSI data, we know that it is not this product, but actually this product. And so what happens is it does change not only the license requirements, but also what the licensing cost is as well. And it definitely reduces the time and resources from on the organization's part substantially.
Excellent, Derek. And one of the things that you mentioned earlier was how effective this tool can be in managing enterprise license agreements and making the calculation of effective license position easier. Can you go through some of that in more detail, please?
Yeah, definitely. So when it comes to, let's wait a second here, move my screen around here a little bit. So we do have what we call is the effective license position. We've got one here for all manufacturers, and what that is just detailing out a summary of your volume licenses, your OEM licenses, what your preliminary license entitlement is, what we're discovering as far as software deployment is concerned, and then finally what the end position is as far as that ELP is concerned. Now with Microsoft in particular, they actually do have a report that they have created, and it's called their ELP for SAM services. There's a variety of resellers or SAM boutique firms out there that are providing ELP work on behalf of Microsoft, and we have duplicated that this particular document. So if Microsoft were to ask you to share your license position with them, they would recognize this as an official document that would act as a way to officially share your ELP. And so we do have some SAM providers that do leverage this particular report for the work that they do with customers as well as with Microsoft as well. Was there another part to that question, Rob, or was I able to cover all that in enough detail?
You know, that was it, Derek. The next question, this is a softball for you. Is the product available and supported in the United Kingdom?
Yes, it is. Yep, that's where License Dashboard's home base is. So it's out of York, which is 2 hours north of London. We have training classes that organizations can even take a train up to as well, but it's definitely supported in the United Kingdom.
So the next question is regarding the important point that I made about a release. And this question is it reasonable to expect a release in respect of a wide-reaching audit to release in respect of all products identified as possible audit subject matter as opposed to just the actual products that are audited? Also, what is a reasonable period of time to require before another audit is undertaken? There's two ways to think about the release. Generally, you release if it's an audit pursuant to an agreement or agreements. You want a release that pertains to any and all claims that were or could have been brought prior to the date of the settlement that arise under the agreement. So, for example, if you're in an EA agreement and there's an audit of your EA agreement, then you're going to want to get a settlement that forecloses any liability related to that agreement. We typically negotiate, for example, when we roll off of a term agreement into a new agreement, we negotiate a release related to the prior agreement. In other instances where it's not an agreement, we deal with the products that are audited, or in some cases it could be the publishers that are the subject of an audit. So different scope of release will apply in different situations. I say from an end user perspective, the broadest possible release is the best. On the issue of audit forbearance, which is the second part of the question that deals with what is a reasonable time period to involve an audit, I would say generally 1 year is reasonable. But if you're in an unlimited license agreement or an agreement that is designed to have an all-you-can-eat or a buffet type component to it, then I would say the term of that all-you-can-eat agreement, to the extent that it's greater than 1 year, would be also a reasonable time period. So again, how long is going to depend on the agreement, but most typical is a period of 1 year. So I want to thank everybody for participating. If you have additional questions for either Derek or me, please feel free to email them to us. And if you stay on the line for 1 second, we have a special announcement that we'd like to make. So as many of you